hey, can we be another player for early stage capital? The fastest ever company we've done through the studio in 6 weeks. Last fund we did, the $20 million Studio 3, which we go from kind of meh idea to very good idea in all these different categories. Right now, we can build a landing page in 10 seconds. And what Mesh does is basically aggregates all of our contacts, which is now north of 17,000, 300, 500, or 1.5 million as the first investment.
Due to your influence, some studios are having structured processes around building ventures.
It's about 470-ish at this point that have entered validation, and about 50-ish have moved into creation. It's about 10% in each phase.
Great, T.A. Happy to talk to you today about venture studios and your journey at PSL. If you can just introduce Pioneer Square Labs, like how it started in 2015, how you joined in 2018, and what is the difference between 2018 and now 2025? Would be interesting to know what you see in the venture studio space.
That's a lot to cover, but thanks, Max, for having me, and thanks for all that you've done to drive the overall venture studio kind of narrative forward. I really appreciate that. So yes, as you said, PSL or Pioneer Square Labs, most people know us now as PSL, started in 2015. My partner, Greg Gottesman, had worked at a Madrona, which is one of our largest venture firms here in Seattle. And he and I used to be on the board of Startup Weekend together, along with Brad Feld and a few other people. And Greg had gone to a Startup Weekend and pitched an idea for Airbnb for dogs. And that he brought that idea, won the Startup Weekend. He brought it back to Madrona on Monday and said, hey, I think there's something here. We should put a little money into this and try to explore this particular idea. That idea ultimately went on to be Rover.com, which is the world's largest pet services company, went public. But that was the foundation of Greg really thinking about venture studios. And this would have been sort of probably 2011, 2012, something like that. And so he started Madrona Venture Labs alongside the venture fund there. And a couple of years went by. They were going to raise another fund. And Greg wanted to spend all of his time on the venture studio model and less time on the venture part of that. We also had lots of strong connection with Brad Feld. And Brad and Greg and my partner Jeff and my other partner Mike all got together and basically, let's go do a studio, just to focus all of our attention on a studio thing. And that's really how we left Madrona and how we ended up at PSL. So that's 2015-ish. So the first couple years were just purely studio only, in a very natural studio, come up with ideas, a small team of all the right functional areas. And what they found, and this was prior to me showing up at PSL, but what they found and what many studios find is it's hard to figure out how do you fund these companies and when do you get them out of the studio and get some early stage capital into them. And the balance between, if you keep them in the studio too long, they're expensive. You can only work on so many, a finite or smaller number of projects. If you kick them out of the studio too quickly, they're not good enough. They don't have enough momentum to go raise good capital. So they struggle and fail. So this is I think a lot of studios, including PSL, found that this is an opportunity to create a venture fund that lives alongside the studio. That was point one for the fund. Point two was we're in this magical place called Seattle. And despite the fact that we have so many great large companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Costco, Expedia, T-Mobile, AT&T, et cetera, these are all based here in Seattle. We don't have as much early stage capital, seed-based capital. So point two for a venture fund was, hey, can we be another player for early stage capital for startup companies that are in this region? The venture fund idea then sort of materialized. And the third point about the venture fund was really Julie Sandler, who Greg had recruited at Madrona, was looking to kind of sort of lead on a venture side. And so a couple of years into it, then along comes the venture fund. That's when I joined. And at that point, they had sort of been operating for a couple of years. I was an early investor in PSL. I knew everybody, at the team. I'd helped recruit some of the early team members as friends of mine that I'd worked with in the past. And I had recently sold the company to Google. That was my fifth company. It was my third successful exit. And I was thinking about what I was going to do next. And I'd been talking to Brad about that. And Brad had funded a couple of the companies I'd worked on in the past. And, I asked Brad for some advice. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing another company. And he's like, great. If you do, I'd love to invest in it. But, you've done 5 companies now. You've seen the whole cycle. Maybe you should spend a little time with a lot of companies instead of a lot of time with one. And so I sort of really took that to heart, and I started really thinking about the studio model and went and talked to Greg and Jeff and Mike and decided to come over to PSL and add a little bit of process and structure to what they were already doing organically. And for those people who don't know me, I'm a mechanical engineer. I love thinking about machines that build other machines. I love thinking about process and structure. And that was a skill that wasn't really, there wasn't as much of that at PSL. An opportunity for me to A, work on a new model, B, continue to work with Brad, C, have a kind of a clear value add to the organization. And we were raising or had just raised the venture fund, and an opportunity to learn about venture investing alongside doing the studio work.
We've published several research papers and reports on family offices, VC, venture studios, and AI. You can find the links in the description and download them for free. We are now looking for family offices and venture studios to participate in our new 2025 study. Find the information in the description. It's interesting for me. I think that might be even due to your influence, some studios are perceived like some structured processes, having structured processes around building ventures, some stage gate models. But you are also a huge influencer in this field, and many people consider PSL as one of the top well-known studios, and many take you as a good example. Do you think that PSL succeeded with this model? And can you say that this is definitely something that can potentially be compared to typical venture capital, and some types of GPs have not launch their venture fund, but launch a venture studio?
I would say, unfortunately, even for us, and obviously I can't comment necessarily on the broad category, but on the narrow category, still too early to tell. And there's a couple of reasons of that. One, we could say in the early days of PSL, we had high variability on how we did things. So the earlier companies might have high beta, like, oh, that one worked, that one didn't work. Well, we don't really know why that one worked or didn't work. And as you get a little bit more process oriented, you theoretically then should be able to say that worked because of that reason and that didn't work because of that reason. And that's point one. Point two is, we all at venture studios, you invest at the earliest stage, obviously at foundation or pre-foundation. So when the company is formed, it means it takes the longest possible time for a big company to materialize. Look at an Amazon or a Microsoft, first 2, 3, 4, 5 years, not that great. So it takes a while for the best companies to mature. Now, every now and again, you're going to pick something that matures very, very quickly, but that's a little bit of an oddity as opposed to a common. So the biggest and best of our companies are still growing and still maturing. The Boundless is a good example of that one of the earlier kind of companies that is still growing very, very nicely and is a pretty substantial company at this point. So we have high variability at the beginning. We had low volume. And we also have to wait around for a long period of time. So too early to tell, but I would say conceptually that the model still makes a lot of sense. And the model means most startups still fail. Mm-hmm. Can we help them fail before they start? Mm-hmm. Right? By doing a lot of work there. Mm-hmm. Can we accelerate them into the market to get them funded and give them a chance? And can we surround a founder with all of the skills that are not directly related or important to the business? Finance, HR, operations, all that sort of stuff. And all of those are true still for a founder today, that still need to try to validate the idea with best practices, try and form the company, try and get their teams up and running early, and make sure they're making better, more informed decisions around that. So I think conceptually that still matters. The same could be said for YC and Techstars and other ways to surround founders to do it. All of this modulo, and I hope we get to talk about AI, right? This is all very true and probably consistent until a couple of years ago, and maybe still trying to figure out how does AI change how we build these companies, how we validate these companies, how we staff these companies, how we fund these companies, and many different things. So I think we're right in the thick of that, type of trying to figure out that type of, does it change the venture model as a whole? Does it change venture studio models? Does it change the founder model? And I think the answer is probably. And yet we're not exactly sure what the right answer is there, but we're definitely spending a lot of time trying to figure it out.
Actually, I wanted to talk about how AI is changing how venture studios operate, because in the last couple of weeks, I put maybe 20 research requests in ChatGPT o3 to analyze different business ideas. And what it gives you, it's like, oh, wow, it earlier took maybe 2 weeks to do such kind of deep research on all the competitors, on all the different markets, on all the pricing models and everything. And I just think, oh, wow, what could earlier take as maybe ideation on one idea, 2 weeks of research and talking to customers, you can get immediately in any field, leaders at way more. How much does it cost, and what companies produce similar systems, and how it's just incredible how you can get much faster answers in a couple of minutes in comparison with what took earlier 2 weeks to get about any business idea. So I think this definitely will shrink the process of company creation. And people, earlier it took a lot of time to build a website, then to build an app, and now it's shrinking. And I'm thinking that venture studios, how will it influence them? So will they bring more value until later stages and making companies more mature during the same 1-2 years of incubating, or will they will not be bringing a lot of value? So if you can elaborate on what are your findings around applying different AI tools and research on launching new companies, might be interesting too.
So as a systems tools processy guy, we started 6 years ago or so, starting to automate different parts of our process. So some of that turns into playbooks. Some of that turns into little hacky projects on the side that would do different types of things that would accelerate everything from customer discovery to competitive landscape generation to business model generation to things like that. So we had a bunch of those, and we built one particular tool that captures basically our ideation sessions. So we would, put an idea into this little tool. Everybody who's in the ideation session could vote on it. And then we'd have a comment thread of have you heard about this competitor or this or that? About 3 years ago, or just as sort of pre-ChatGPT, but not too much, we basically said, hey, can we ask an AI to take this idea you just wrote down in sort of free form and more structure it into a customer value prop feature set business model, and then do an automatic competitive landscape review? Okay, so we built that into the ideation tool. About 6 months ago, we had a new venture lead start, and basically the advances had continued along. We said, listen, can we rethink the way the ideation tool kind of works? So we did 3 things. First is we did something similar to what you talked about, which is, can I basically AI-ify our entire workflow? Which is take a founder, think about an idea, structure the idea, do a competitive landscape, think about a landing page, do all of that work. And we've now automated that into a product we call Spark. The second thing that we did was, for all of our companies, they end up still having to touch people. So you still have to find founders or early team members. You still have to find early customers, and you still have to find investors. So what we did is we built a second product that we call Mesh. And what Mesh does is basically aggregates all of our contacts, which is now north of 17,000, it prioritizes them based on their role and responsibility. Like this person's a CFO, this person's an investor, this person's a CTO, et cetera. So we try to bucket them into those three different categories. Now it's not clean bucketing, but it's pretty good. We also then, for everybody who's a D, director, VP, C, VP or above, C level, we go and do a much deeper enrichment of them, effectively getting all of their background and everything we can know about them effectively like an automated Perplexity or ChatGPT search. We write that to the database. Okay, so now we have some numbers of thousands of contacts that we know what their current role responsibility is, what company they work at, how big that company is, what they might do, and what they might know something about, and what role they might play in PSL. That's called mesh. Now you can bring Spark and mesh together. So for any given idea, you define the idea. It does customer value prop, feature set, business model, competitive landscape, and it says, who's the ideal customer profile? Oh, I'm looking for a CFO of a mid-market company that might have between 50 and 500 employees that's in the insurance space, or pick your ICP. And then Spark and Mesh work together. And basically now we're outbound messaging to say, here's the 37 people that we know that fit this ICP, and automate the outbound message like, hey, Joe, over there at XYZ company, we would love to talk to you about this idea summarized below. And could you tell us on a scale of 1 to 10, is this a high pain point, something you want solved? Is this something that if we could solve it, you might have budget for it? So basically direct customer outreach. And the feedback that comes back is inside of Spark and Mesh as well. So pretty quickly, almost in like less than 24 hours, and presumably it could happen in less than hours, you could go from a totally nascent idea to understanding whether you should do anything or not because it's better than or you could position it in a landscape, to I've now done direct customer outreach, to I've built automatically a landing page if I want to send more, and next week we're going to start automating the outbound marketing for that, to very, very quickly a package which is, this is a good idea. Okay, so one other piece here for people who are paying deep attention to this whole evolution of AI is over the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, reasoning has really emerged as an important component. So what we did is say like, well, what is a good idea? Well, a good idea can be defined by big market, clear competitive differentiation, easy sort of cost to market, high price point, so on and so forth. So we built a rubric, which we go from kind of meh idea to very good idea in all these different categories. And then what we do is say, take the idea that we had, use the reasoning to keep improving the idea until it's basically high score in all the most important categories. So it's reasoning, rubrics, an ideation machine, and a customer contact list that can be brought together to find the right ideas that resonate with customers, where we have to build a founding team, and even starting to build the target investor list. So that's called Spark and Mesh. And that is something that we're just like, so having so much fun building that. Now, what does that mean? It means a founder can walk in and they can say, oh, I have XYZ idea. And we're like, great, just tell me about the idea. We'll put it in here. And here we're going to give you back effectively a working document that even if you choose not to work with PSL, it's fine. But wow, how quickly we took their idea, which was kind of like poorly formed, into well-formed. And then from that, if we want to then bring it into the studio, we can decrease the amount of time we can get to a better than average idea. We can decrease the amount of time we can talk to customers, potential team members, and investors. We can increase the fidelity of the understanding there. And we're getting much closer to taking the feature set part of that, meaning like, okay, now let's describe the product. And can we get the product into a product like Replit or Lovable or one of those kind of tools, so that we can, right now, we can build a landing page in 10 seconds. Can we build a product or a clickable prototype or an alpha of that thing using a product like those vibe coding products in a day? That's what we're doing at PSL. And that's how we're using, we had to have a structured process. We then sort of AI-ified that structured process. And I think I would argue, near the leading edge of all of that.
In 1 year, there will be an AI where we can say, explore the biggest pains and just earn me money.
Yes, that's right. Well, you could work it forward, which I described. You could also work it backward. So you could work it backward. And I think there are a few studios out there in the world who I think are doing a very smart job of working backwards from the set of customer problems. So if I did have 500 CFOs of mid-market companies and I could basically query them, and I did this with a bunch of lawyers last week, is I could query them of what are their biggest pain points they think should be solved with AI. And they articulate them, ill-formed, but that's okay. And I could just take their descriptions and I can drop them into Spark and Mesh, and then I can basically respond back to them like, oh, that's a good idea. Or here are 5 companies that are already doing what you think you want. Go try those first. And if they're no good, then come back and see me again. So there's value to be had by working from an aggregated customer set into the idea back to the aggregated customer set, or there's value in working from a founder forward, or a founder, which is founder capability, or there's value in adding from an idea forward that then will need a founder and a founding team and a set of customers. So either way, they kind of work, and we're all trying to push that through this platform called Spark, because it also normalizes the way that we can now compare and contrast different ideas.
We need to talk about venture studios and their model. And I think that actually what happened like in the last years, maybe already like a bit outdated, or it's more exciting to talk about AI and how venture building is changing. But I'd like to take some topics around some business model and how much do you invest in companies? How many companies do you launch each year on average? How much equity do you take? So if you can share about your process of building companies and how to make it an effective way of multiplying money of investors, this will be interesting to listen about.
Yeah. So we have the studio model, which we started with. We added on the venture part of that, and that invests in the companies we started, also invests in other early stage companies in the Pacific Northwest. So that's for those people who are global. That basically means Seattle, Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, Canada, the very upper left-hand corner of the United States, which we've chosen to be geographically focused because we think there's plenty of amazing companies here and great entrepreneurs. And a lot of us have been building companies here for a long time. So right or wrong, we've chosen a geographic focus. About 4 years ago, so you can see almost about every 2 years we kind of add, or every 2 or 3 years we kind of add or really refine and rethink how we're working on things. We added our first corporate studio. So now PSL sits as a three circle Venn diagram of studio, ventures, and corporate innovation. Now, corporate innovation primarily uses the same studio process, albeit the ideas are inspired by corporate partners. And in certain cases, they will acquire those companies. And in many cases, we spin them out as standalone companies and they function as the venture investor. So we have those 3 pieces. And for a small team, we're managing all of that. Okay, now let's come back to the studio, your question. The benefit of studios is you have lots of flexibility. So you can do lots of different things with lots of different kind of people. But our most standard would be if we were going to do a company in the studio, we would be co-founders in that studio or in that company. So we might split the cap table 50-50. Every now and again, if we work with a founder that is a successful repeat founder, that's worth a little something on the cap table. And if they have incredibly strong founder idea fit, or they've had material work before it came to the studio, it might also be worth a little bit of credit. So we end up in that kind of 60-40 kind of category, depending on those 2 variables, both of which are sort of they're pretty clear to understand. Meaning, if a founder came in and I said, hey, this is the person that's been doing this thing for the last 5 years at Amazon, and they're going to start a brand new company to go do XYZ thing, and an investor would look at that and go, oh my God, that's an amazing person. That founder idea fit story through the lens of investors is worth some credit. So somewhere around 50-50, 60-40. That's for the studio side. And when we spin companies out of the studio, we're either doing 300, 500, or 1.5 million. As the first investment. The 1.5 million comes out because we've now done a partnership with another venture firm, and we created a new entity called the AI Studio Fund. And the AI Studio Fund, we've partnered with Mayfield, which is a big venture firm in the Bay Area. They wanted access to all of our AI companies here that we're spinning out of the studio. And so when we spin a company out that's an AI company, which today all of them are, but I guess there's some chance that we wouldn't do one of those, but today or for the last year and a half, they've all been AI companies. So we do 750 from our venture fund and 750 from the AI studio fund, totaling up to 1.5 million on basically day one of the company. Old days would have been 300K out of our venture fund. We've upped that a little bit to 500K for non-AI companies. And then because the AI companies qualify for the AI studio fund, and we wanted it to feel equal between PSV, Pioneer Square Ventures, and AI studio fund, that's the 1.5 million. Yes. Yeah. And it depends a little bit. So going back to the first points I made is we want to make sure we get the companies out of the studio with enough money that they can hire their first employees and start, getting some good momentum. So part of when it's coming through the studio, we are collectively with the CEO making an operating plan. The operating plan says, okay, when am I going to spin out and when am I going to raise more money? And based on when I'm going to raise more money, you think, well, how much money do I need to go from starting the company to when I'm going to successfully raise? So you don't want to overraise or underraise. So that's the difference between that 300, 500, depending on, say I was going to spin out a company in July and I was going to go try and raise money in September and I was going to close money by Thanksgiving. I could put 500K in the bank, but I don't need it if I'm going to go do that. So I put less money in the bank at what are like good terms, but not amazing terms. So that's where we build an operating plan, a fundraising plan during the studio creation process. And then that would sort of dictate how much from whom at what terms, any given company would come out with. We've had some companies that basically, if we found a really good idea with a really good founder, had really good luck and good momentum, they may actually have term sheets from other investors at better terms coming straight out of the studio. So they bypass the AI studio thing or we have to work our way into that round as opposed to the other way around. So that can happen too. And that all comes on the variability of time, fundraising strategy, fundraising momentum, et cetera, and where it fits on the calendar.
So those are money that you invest when the company already spin out from the studio, or when it's just starting. So I want to understand. You mentioned that they need money for some time to hire people and then raise an external round. At the same time, you put some your team of 25 people to work together with them for several months, or what is the period until the company becomes independent and can start fundraising from other investors?
The fastest ever company we've done through the studio was idea to spin out in 6 weeks. That's the fastest. More normally for a successful company, we're in validation for a month or so, and we're in this phase we call creation, which is when there's a CEO in the seat. It's still in the studio. It's still a project for a couple months. So, we feel good when a project is, 3 or 4 months in the studio-ish. Nobody usually wants it to be in the studio any longer than it needs to be because the customers are pulling it out. They want to start hiring people. They want to put some money in the bank. The CEO is aggressive in getting it out. So, it's kind of that 3 or 4 month period of time. And obviously all of the expense for that period of time falls on my studio side of the ledger. That's what my team is doing. That's how we're earning our founding equity. And it's the more momentum we have, the more people we push against it to create more momentum, to get it out of the studio, to turn that momentum into early traction.
So this means actually that they get 300, 500K if it's not an AI company, and plus your support for 3-4 months. How many companies do you have in parallel typically in this active period of?
So we use the phrasing we have 5 phases basically: ideation, and we have thousands of ideas that we've ideated. Those don't really count, but it is a phase, right? It takes time to go do something and put it into Spark and think about it and should we work on it or not. But let's say we do, ideation is a phase. Then there's validation, and validation is usually a team of one of our venture leads, one of us as MDs, and let's assume that it's a PSL-led idea as opposed to a founder-led idea. But and we're trying to validate the idea. That's the kind of month-long period and we're now getting faster at that because of things like Spark and Mesh. At the end of that validation phase is when we basically want a CEO to start leading it, or an entrepreneur residence that moves it into the creation phase. So it's ideation, validation, creation. The end of creation is the day the company is founded, which then leads to the next phase. We call it spin out. And then once it's externally VC funded, that's in scale up. So the phases are ideation, validation, creation, spin out, scale up. The team goes from, one or two in validation to 3, 4, or 5 in creation. And now to answer your question, there's usually 2-ish ideas in creation at any given time. And there's usually 3 or 4 or 5 ideas in early validation or later validation. So somewhere between 5 and 7 ideas are on our leaderboard every Monday. And we run a weekly sprint process. Every week we are effectively promoting or killing projects from one phase or another. We are reallocating resources against them. So once they're in creation, then those resources are protected until we spin that company out. In validation, they're much more dynamic because it's, what do you need to go validate? Is it still on customer validation? Is it on competitive differentiation? Is it on go-to-market? Is it on product? Is it on team? Is it on investors? So depending on that, we'll phase in and out different people during the validation phase.
From ideation to validation, probably like 10% conversion ratio. What is your funnel looks like after validation? Like how many companies, like is it like 50% of companies go from validation to creation and later?
Yeah, while we don't have a prescribed number, it has worked out to be about 10% at each phase. So we now have a database of, I don't know, maybe it's 3,000 or 4,000 ideas. It's many thousands. And again, now with Spark, like, I don't know, Spark actually generates ideas too. So, who knows? It could be an effectively infinite number of ideas. But let's say it's 4,000. And a number of ideas, who cares really? It's how many enter validation. So how many enter validation and how many enter creation? It's about 470-ish at this point that have entered validation, and about 50-ish have moved into creation, of which 40, we just spun out our 41st company. So it's about 1 in 10 at each. It's about 10% in each phase. And what's getting better is it's getting a little bit better. So it might be 1.5 in 10. It might be 2 in 10 type of thing. But what's definitely getting better is the amount of time it takes us to kill an idea or not even start ideas. So picking ones that have a slightly higher throughput or a shorter amount of time. Now there's a point, like if you do true axis graph, one axis is the number of companies you do, and the second is how good is each one of those companies. And good can mean how much did I think about it, how well was it formed, how well did it get funded, how much momentum did it have, et cetera. So we could do fewer companies better. We could do more companies worse or less with less effort. Or we can use AI to increase the number both in terms of more, but also better. And that's what we're trying to do. So our target is 4 to 6 companies a year. So that means we might work on 40 to 60 ideas. And what we're trying to do is both get 4 to 6 great companies out the door and a better yield, or for a better yield where they ultimately get killed, that they get killed faster, or they get killed for the right reason. So we don't waste a lot of time trying to validate on 5 different axes when we should have just killed it on 1.
How many scale-ups do you have? Or like how many of those 41 raised external funding?
37, 38. It's a lot. Like the majority of them, once they end up in creation, the majority of them become companies. And the vast majority of those get venture funded. Now you could define this to say, well, they're all venture funded because our venture fund invested in them. But if I define that as externally venture funded, then that would be somewhere, maybe it's 38, 39, something like that. A large, almost all of them.
Actually, at the website of PSL Ventures, there is a one point explaining that PSL Ventures, a fund, is not leading those companies, rounds of those companies that's spin out of the studio. So it only can join other investors. I think this is for the reason of not having a conflict of interest, and that if other investors say this is a good investment opportunity, then it's it's great. But if some venture studios invest in their companies until Series A or even later, so this is not a good indicator for investors whether those companies are viable in the market or not.
And we try to pull the investor thread that you're bringing up. We try to pull that through every one of the phases. So when we think about a company, to pull it off of ideation, we're like, okay, do we know any good investors that like us that would want to invest in a company like this? If our answer is like, no, we don't know anybody, then it doesn't mean we won't do it. It's just a less good company, and we have to spend more time in the validation phase of figuring out investors. If we're thinking about this on a timeline, during validation, at the beginning, we're just like, yeah, this feels like a pretty good interest in. We have one or two people we know. And as we get to the later part of validation, we do this whole process called investors of validation. We start talking to investors who are either investors in the studio, invested in one or more of our companies, specifically aligned to this particular topic that this company's in. And using Mesh and Spark, we can do that even at a higher velocity, higher volume. So we do a whole function we call investors as validation. Now, those investors tell you a bunch of things. They'll tell you about competitive solutions that you didn't know about. They'll tell you about big gotchas you hadn't been thinking about. They'll tell you about other angels you should go talk to. So there's a lot to be learned from good investors. You have to do enough work to have a clear idea there. You have to have enough confidence that it's going to become a company going to creation. But investors of validation is important. Now, if you move to the next phase of creation, that's when we get into this sort of, let's now talk about the fundraising strategy. Time, who, how much, for what reason, etc. So as we're moving into creation, and we now have an entrepreneur residence leading, we have an approximate time when it's going to become a company. We have a, how do we think we're going to go to market, and how much money do we need for which reason, and what would be the quote unquote best investors, which are VCs and angels or strategics for that particular idea. And then that goes into part of the spin out decision as, okay, we now have customer pull. We know what to build. We have a good team. We have investors who want this thing. And we've now fully formed an idea by the time it's actually founded. And every now and again, as I said, about, 10 to 20% of the time, that investors' validation is so strong that someone says, like, I don't want to wait around. Like, I want to give you a term sheet, like basically when the company is formed, almost as if you might do, as sometimes you'll meet a great founder and say, like, I know it's just a back of a napkin. You haven't really done much work on it. We just want to invest in you. Here's a term sheet at modest valuation. Please take our money. So that happens to studio companies too.
The fund raised 180 million across two funds, and the studio raised approximately about 50 million, if I understand correctly. So when you invest, let's say 500K in companies or 750K in AI companies from your fund, from your studio fund, this is actually like the fund is both like covering your team costs and also investing in company from this fund. Is it correct? Or those some small capital is coming from the PSL Ventures?
So if you think of them as two different entities, which they are, fiscal entities, the majority of the money we've raised for the studio, that pays for the majority of all the studio people, right? So their salaries, et cetera, comes out of that. And so the last fund we did, the $20 million Studio 3, like that should give us 5 or more years of operating capital to hire all the people to go to run all the studio stuff. We also take a portion of our management fees from the fund and we funnel them into the studio, whether that's paying a portion of my salary or our managing director salaries are going straight in there. So we have a little bit of accounting that happens between those two entities. But the vast majority of, the venture fund is a standard 2 and 20 kind of fund. So it is there to invest in studio companies, and that's one of its unique advantages. It's also there to invest in early stage companies or founders, and that's one of its advantages, all focused on the Pacific Northwest. So that's a pretty standard entity, of which the only little nuance there is, us as managing directors kind of work for both entities, so to speak.
So like those initial capital, like the first capital that company gets is from the separate fund, which also invests in other companies. Okay.
Correct.
And you earlier shared about 3 archetypes of founders you attract for studios. You mentioned now some successful repeat founders. And then second, you mentioned some like product managers, or maybe someone who worked at some technology companies or in any other type of companies, but some like product manager mindset. Could you share what are what is this, the third one type, and
Yeah.
also explain like who is the best for the studio, and whether is it easier for you to attract some specific type of people?
Yeah. So we end up with founders now in 4 different categories. So one, as you mentioned, is repeat founder. 2 is PM to CEO, which is that second use case. And then the third is that I tend to call the young tech builder, or YTB. They loosely skew into age brackets because to be a repeat founder, you have to do it for a little while. So they're usually kind of, 40 or 50. The PM to CEO is usually somebody who's like 25 to 40. And then the YTB is usually somebody who's under 30. They all benefit from the studio in slightly different ways. So, and then the fourth category is somebody who's coming from corporate. So a number of our companies, when we're working with corporate partners, the CEOs were people who are up and comers at that corporate. They know the domain really well. They understand the corporate partner. They know how to get the most out of that. So we have examples of that too. Now, you could argue that's still a PM to CEO persona. It's just a little bit different than hiring a PM or finding a PM from Amazon or Microsoft or Zillow or any of the other great technology companies we have here.
So like corporate is the fourth type.
Yeah, corporate. Yeah, a corporate executive or corporate, management development person who was on the management track, but it's like, yeah, I'm going to go be a CEO of my own company instead. So they each benefit in different ways, and they all benefit from speed for sure. They all benefit from helping create a more complete company and focusing their attention only on the things that they can do. They all benefit from our collective experience. They all benefit from having fractional resources in different categories like engineering and design and go-to-market and recruiting. They all benefit in the same kind of ways. But now if I think about it a little bit different, is if you're a repeat founder, you know that how important momentum and speed is, and you also know how important focus is because you've done it before. So you disproportionately value this sort of like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you have all these people to surround me and I know how to manage a team much more effectively. They benefit from more higher conviction. So, if you're a repeat founder, you usually are like working on like 40 ideas all at the same time. You're good at thinking about ideas and spotting problems and thinking about what you need is conviction on which one you're going to pick because you have lots of them. Like I have lots of ideas. I'm a 5-time founder. So I have a new idea for a new company. I mean, independent of PSL, probably every 2 or 3 weeks. So then, but you're going to go commit for the next 5 or 10 years of your life for this company. You better have high conviction. So a repeat founder overvalues that. The PM to CEO values, they get the benefit of, they didn't know what it takes to go create a company to be a CEO. And so we have lots of that structure and playbook. They oftentimes, if they have their own idea, that's fine. We'll work that idea. If they don't have their own idea, then they benefit obviously secondarily from the fact that we are convicted on an idea that we want them to go run. The YTB, benefits from that too. They tend to underappreciate all of the other normal company building stuff because they've never done it before. They tend to over-index on product and they under-index on go-to-market distribution. They underappreciate how valuable investors can be. They're like, oh, I don't need those investors. What do they know? What are those old guys? What do they know? They tend to benefit by seeing the kind of value that by surrounding their ideas and their technical capabilities with other kinds of people can really accelerate and more completely build their companies. So they all benefit similarly with just a little bit more weighting in one direction or another, depending on those different kinds of personas.
If you can cover a bit about your corporate practice, how does it work? So with how many companies do you work, or like, is it like a franchise model when some corporations wants to innovate? So if you can cover it a bit, would be interesting.
Yeah. So we tend to think that what we are trying to create with the studio is we are trying to create uniquely differentiated venture scale companies in the world. One way to do that is to be partnering with people who have something unique. So I'll use Fortive, which is our biggest and longest partner. They understand, so they're an industrial manufacturing and measurement company. They own about 40 different companies that do all different kinds of things like Fluke and Tektronix and Industrial Scientific. And they sometimes they're hardware companies, sometimes they're software companies, but they tend to understand large domains of economic buyers very, very well. So that if you're doing a new company can be really powerful. So when we think of our corporate partners, we're looking to that as primarily unique ways to create uniquely differentiated companies. Same way we have to if we just did Natural Studio. We are not a consulting company. We are not there to teach them how to build companies per se, though they get to learn that along the way. We're not there to build new features for their existing products. They can hire other people to do that. We're there to help them create meaningful companies where they end up being on the cap table of those particular companies. So we're pretty narrow in how we do that. I mean, narrow in our goals. And there's lots of people who do lots of other stuff that's not that. I mean, you could go from McKinsey and Bain and BCG and all that is with the pure consulting. Some venture studios will do education and training and things like that, where we don't really do that. They get that as a byproduct. The three product offerings that we have. So our primary is we have an ongoing, we work with you year after year after year. We run all the same processes I've just gone through, working on their particular ideas, sometimes with their particular people. We also, as part of that, we have two different specific functions we do. We do these ideation days where we work with their teams to come up with many different ideas using products like Spark and Mesh, and how quickly can we come up with lots and lots of ideas that they think would be exciting for them to do, where they'd want to be co-founders in those companies. We also run these things that are called sprint weeks. Now, we borrowed this idea from High Alpha, and we've now adapted it ourselves a little bit, where we will bring 3 or 4 teams that are part PSL people and part corporate people to PSL for 1 week, and we basically compress the whole validation thing into 1 week. They find this very, very interesting. And for us, it starts to separate the wheat from the chaff very quickly. So usually it's 4 teams. It's usually about 4 or 5 people per team. It's half our team, half their team. They bring domain expertise and maybe leadership, and we're bringing all the normal studio stuff. And on Monday, Tuesday is really customer validation. By Wednesday, they're doing their first versions of a deck. By Thursday, we usually have a working prototype of the product. By Friday, we're doing effectively a demo day. That's very important. And we do this with like Fortive, like we do 3 or 4 of these a year. And so we do ideation days, validation or sprint weeks, and then those one or more of those ideas will move into the natural creation part of our business.
What are typical terms? So you create companies together with those corporations, or like what is the business model here?
Yeah. So if we do the ideation days or sprint weeks, they would pay us for just that period of time. If we do an ongoing, the way we work with Fortive, we basically have a quarterly fee or an annual fee that is used to do ongoing work of ideation, validation, and creation. And then when we spin those companies out, we usually split our side of the cap table with the corporate partner. It depends a little bit on who the partner is and how it comes together. But generally, the founder still ends up with more than half of the company. We end up with splitting our side of the cap table with the corporate partner. So they not only get new ideas, they get a meaningful stake on the cap table. They get the benefit of this ideation validation, especially in this AI forward world, whether that's the AI tools we built or AI companies we're building. And so that we think is quite a significant benefit for many of these companies.
How do you think, what is the right type of a founder for the studio itself, or like founders, like what qualifications and what previous experience must be as this minimum viable qualification of the studio founder?
If I put them in the stack rank order, I'd rather have a successful repeat founder because they know how to run a company, or they know how to do all the functional things that they need. And so, that's just the more functional skills they have is useful. And if you ran a business at Microsoft or Amazon or whatever, like you have lots of the functional skills, not all the functional skills of a founder, but never really probably raised external capital, but you probably had to go talk to a senior set of executives and get capital and build a team and recruit people, but it's different. So the second is they all need to be good at selling. Like they need to want to do customer discovery, customer development, ask for credit cards, like selling. It's an important skill. And, if you're a YTB, you need this too. Like I need to be able to find customers who are going to pay me money to do a thing. They should all be good storytellers. And storytelling is pitching, it's recruiting, it's finding customers. And so we get to evaluate that both on the first couple of meetings, but then also as we move it through the studio process. And some people are better than others, but that ability to communicate clearly, concisely, in a compelling way, that's a really important skill.
You are talking now about the founders of the studio itself, correct?
Oh, you're talking about, no, I was talking about founders for the companies. If you're talking about founders for studios, I think if I were starting a brand new studio or recommending, and I have recommended, as you know, to many people who are just getting going, I think you need a builder type. I think you need a founder type and somebody presumably who's founded one or more companies themselves because they have founder empathy. And you need a fundraiser type. You need somebody who has the network or the experience or the background to raise capital for the studio, to help raise capital for the companies, to build that network. And I think a lot of people who look more like me, meaning they are a successful founder, start a studio without their partner who looks more like Jeff. So my partner, Jeff, is the most active angel investor in Seattle. He's invested north of 300 companies. Like, he's been doing it for 25 years. There's like no investor who's invested at all in Seattle doesn't know Jeff. So when Jeff or Greg, I mean, Greg's similar too, but Jeff in that particular case is the counterpart to, the builder, founder person and the fundraiser network person, I think are two important pieces that, I recommend for everything who's going to found a studio, at least those two people. And then depending on what kind of companies you're going to build and who you're going to do it, I might in this period of AI also add two more. One of those people or a third person should be highly technical and want to be, how do I use AI to advantage our companies in many different ways? And it could be also, so if we think that building products is going to get easier and easier and faster, the thing that'll start to differentiate these companies is either the technology, but probably more the distribution. Can I find customers in a more efficient, better, smarter, cheaper way than the same guys who have the same idea who can copy my product down the street? And so there may be somebody else as a persona or an early hire for a studio, which is more about distribution and customer access.
Thanks so much, TA, for sharing insights for venture studios and everyone who is involved in this model.
Well, it's easy to find me at TAM at PSL. My parents had good foresight, which is TAM, like total addressable market, at PSL.com. Easy to find us there, easy to find me on LinkedIn. And, I appreciate all that you're doing, Max, to drive the studio. Hopefully the Global Startup Studio Network is doing a lot of good work in this category. I know I try to share as much as we can about what PSL has done and is doing and what's worked and what's not. And, we're all kind of in this together. We're all learning together. We're startups too. We have to be adaptable too. We have to continue to learn as these new tools come around. And it's great to be learning together.